read this article, and I would give a very brief introduction, and then you can pick up any part which needs further elaboration. And for me, this discussion would be very helpful for two reasons. One, this article has attracted a lot of attention in India. And in a way, it is considered as a break with the usual discourse on communalism in India, because it questions very entrenched ideas and theories on communalism in India. And it has been not only published in the Economic and Political Weekly, but it has been reproduced in 3 books. This article has been listed in 3 different books, including one which is a reader on communalism produced by the Economic and Political Weekly. And this is available, article is available on Academic Edu, and the number of hits it gets is enormous, because as you know that if you put your article on Academic Edu, it keeps on telling you how many people have downloaded it, how many people have viewed it. And I find this is a good opportunity, and eventually I might develop this into a book, and that's the kind of hope. When I wrote this article, my main interest in writing this article was to go beyond the appearances and go into the reality, deeper structures of what is called communalism in India. We will come to this, but that I also have difference of view on the use of the word communalism as a practice in India and possibly in other South Asian countries. But we'll come to that. So one was that communalism is merely understood in terms of political parties and political organizations and the kind of activities which they do, and whether they are election activities or other activities, but mainly in terms of this. So Bharatiya Janata Party would be considered as a Hindu communal organization, Muslim League as Muslim communal organization, maybe Shiromani Akali Dal as a Sikh communal organization, mainly at the level of political work. What I wanted to do was that communalism in India is a much deeper, and it's very structural in its various institutions. And sometimes it is unseen, and one need to uncover that unseen. And I must say that this insight came from dealing with institutional racism. That institutional racism is not merely what English League says, or what the British National Party or what the Brexit Party says. The institutional racism is what is practiced in police and the judiciary and national health services and prisons and all the institutions. And I pay tribute to the work of William Macpherson, the judge who first brought this into dominance. Though he wasn't the first to use it, it was used quite a lot in America. And my daughter actually helped me to understand that. She knew more about American use of the institutional racism. So the inspiration came from there, and then so that was one major purpose to lay bare those deeper structures, that which means that even if, for example, BJP is defeated, okay, which is considered as a Hindu communal party, it is removed from power, someone else comes, that doesn't mean that communalism is gone away, because the institutions which perpetuate this communalism, and in the case of India, which means the dominance of the Hindu communal prejudices, views, opinions, practices, norms, values, still there, whether it's in judiciary or in police, security forces, intelligence agencies, media, academia, and so on and so forth, or even NGOs. So that was the main purpose of that article. The other was also I wanted to hit at this idea that both majority and minority communalism are equally dangerous. A lot is written in India that minority communalism is also dangerous, and normally when they write minority communalism, they refer to Muslim communalism. That maybe some Muslim organizations are communal, and they also strengthen communal views and practices. And from that, jump is made to say that both are equally dangerous and equally harmful. And I wanted to hit at that, saying that when you equate two unequals, when there are two unequals and you say they are equals, which actually means that you are reinforcing the power of the one who's already powerful. Okay, because equating two unequals is actually not recognizing that there is an inequality. So not recognizing inequality ipso facto means that you are reinforcing whatever exists now, which is the power of the majority. So I want to argue that is majority communalism, which is the most dangerous in India. And that is what is Hindu communalism in India is. And again, I took the clue from the writings on institutional racism, that there might be minority racism, which is in Britain called reverse racism, or even reverse sexism in isolated cases. Some women might have stereotyped view about men, but both the reverse racism, that is the racism of the minority ethnic racial groups, or the reverse sexism, that women holding anti-man views, are hugely sort of weak because they don't have the institutional power. So whether it's racism or sexism, the question of power is very important. It's not only a question of views and practices. It is who can put those views and practices into power. And that's where racism and communalism become important. So I want to use that to show that this practice of equating to communalism, majority and minority, is a flawed practice, and it ignores or it hides the dominant position of the majority community. So that was the second objective, and that was absolutely new, because in past, people who want to claim secularists, they would say we condemn all forms of communalism, and that means we could condemn the communalism of the majority and minority. And I want to say that sometimes minority communities do act of collective organization as a defensive measures, because they're under attack. And if you take away from them their collective measures, you are further making them more vulnerable, And I did not cite in the article, but I had this in mind, that when the anti-Sikh violence came up in Delhi after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination by two of our security guards, who were angered by Mrs. Gandhi's decision to storm the Golden Temple in 1984, called the Operation Blue Star. Two of our security guards who have been very loyal to her for so many years, and they got involved in assassinating her. So there were massive riots against the Sikhs. In many places, Sikhs got together in their gurdwaras, used their traditional weapons to defend themselves. Now, by using the idea of communalism, that any kind of collective activity by a religious group is communal and has to be condemned, will be flawed in this case, because in this case they are trying to defend themselves, and if they don't defend themselves collectively, they'll be more vulnerable. Each one of them will be individual. So I want to hit this idea also, that the collective organizational strength which a minority community adopts should not be condemned, and it must be seen as a defensive measure, and therefore collective the communalism, the two communities of majority and minority, cannot be equated. And then, of course, I went into giving evidence, and I took media, and I had written a long article on media. Especially I had criticized the radio and TV coverage of Operation Blue Star and events. I can send you that article later on to Thomas, and where I showed that how media had, and now it has become recognized that how the Indian media is so dominated by Hindu communal prejudices, bias, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, I looked at the judiciary. Some of the decisions of the judiciary again showed that how they were Hindu communal biases. And then some interesting information came up from the security forces. And what was very interesting was intelligence agencies, which is what sometimes called the deep state. That there is a deep state which is hidden behind the government. You don't actually see them, and they are the ones who are pulling levers of power. And someone shared very interesting information with me. He was a human rights activist. That it's a given rule. More secret is the intelligence agency, because there are several intelligence agencies in the Indian framework. Even here also, M16, M15, and so on and so forth. There are similarly several of those intelligence agencies. Raw intelligence, raw, and raw is called Search and Analysis Wing. There's CBI, Intelligence Bureau, and so on and so forth. So this information which is given to me, that more secret is the agency, less likelihood of any minority person being employed in it. So the real inner core of the state will be in the hands of upper caste Hindus. That there will be no Muslims or Sikhs or Christians or even Dalits employed in that, because it's believed that you can't trust those minorities. And so it becomes even more and more Hindu bias. So I kind of did that to show institutional communalism in the security forces, and also use some other examples, like one Chief Justice of Allahabad High Court in a public speech in Chandigarh, which was reported, not in a full form, but in a diminished form, in a kind of abbreviated form in the Tribune newspaper. He said, and at that time, when the period he was referring to, he was a justice on the Punjab and Haryana High Court. He said that whenever the cases of Sikh terrorists came to the High Court, no Sikh judge was ever trusted. Case was never allowed to be seen by a Sikh, because it was believed that they can't be trusted. So it was always given to a non-Sikh, and most likely to a Hindu judge. So that means that it is not the merit of the case which was determined. It is the bias of the. So in the other, it will not happen the other way around. That if a Hindu terrorist is tried, it is not that Hindu judges will not be trusted. Hindu judges will be still trusted. If Hindu terrorist. So similarly, I showed that how there are several of these flaws in the working of the judiciary services. And finally, I argued that one way of countering these biases is to have systematic data. In India, we did not have that practice. Here, many of you, Surinder would know more about it. She does that kind of work. There's an equal opportunity legislation, which makes any kind of racist activity or sexist activities or anti-disability activity illegal, and therefore people can be prosecuted on that basis. In India, we do not have that. We do not collect data that how many people of ethnic minority, of religious minorities are recruited, and it is not systematically monitored, and steps are not instituted. I'm not saying that equal opportunity legislation is perfect. There are flaws in that, and there are weaker, but at least it gives you an kind of institution to do that. So I want to say that it's important to not only theorize, but actually collect data and monitor on a legal basis. The National Human Rights Commission was set up 43 years after India's independence. And even then it's very weak. It does not have the power to implement its decision-making processes. So what I was saying was that the institutional mechanism to monitor the dominance of Hindu communalism, to record it, and to weaken are very weak. It does not exist. That in Western societies, there is equal opportunity legislation. And finally, I had some views on religion, which some of you may disagree with. I thought that some of the people who claim themselves to be secularists, they take this idea that we condemn communalism of all kinds, that we condemn the communalism, the majority, minority, because we think religion is a very divisive subject. And I want to argue that religion is a two-dimensional phenomenon, that religion has the capabilities of creating sectarian conflict, but religion also has a humanistic aspect. that religion sometimes acts as a solace to people who are tormented by various problems. And there is a humanistic dimension. And I took examples of Sikh religion, Islam, and one small religion called Ralaswami faith, where they do lots of activities together. And Langar from the Sikh community is very well known. They do it collectively, and one could say it's a communal activity because they do it collectively. But such a humanistic activity, cooking food together, eating the food together without any distinctions, and also serving those who are needed. So I want to argue that religion also needs to be seen in a more complex way. And one of the weaknesses of the secularist discourse has been that religion is always condemned and it's seen in a unidimensional view. So those are the kind of main things which I argued. But overwhelming point was that the theoretical tools of institutional communalism helps you to understand deeper structures of communalism in compared with the existing communalism discourse in India, which only looks at political communalism and political parties. That is what I would kind of say were the main findings and the main contribution to the paper. Yeah.
As you said, religion has a humanistic aspect. So even if you see non-religious people like atheists, they also have a humanistic.
They also, sorry?
They are also they also do the same things like what you see in the religious organization like Gurudwara and Islam.
Yes.
So it is a common. It is everywhere.
No. I'm not saying that non-religious people can't do that. What I'm mainly saying was that those secularists who think religion only in a one-dimension form as a destructive belief, defective, destructive system of belief and practice are flawed. That religion also has a humanistic form. Now, on the question of atheism or non-believers, I do not question that non-believers do a lot of good things, but that does not mean that non-believers also do not do horrible things. Non-believers have also committed atrocities on a massive scale. What happened during Stalinism was done by non-believers. Sort of thousands and thousands of people were liquidated. Why happened in Khmer Rouge, which is they are hardcore atheists. Why wiped out the whole communities in the urban areas? And so someone merely becoming a non-believer and atheist does not entitle himself or herself to be more humanist and more caring. So the field is open. As much as a religious person can be humanistic and caring, similarly, an atheist person can also be cruel and murderer as much as a religious person. So one can't claim superiority over the other. That's what I was arguing. That follows from my argument. It's not in the paper, but that follows from my argument. And in a way, that's also engaging with Marxism. That I think that lots of left-wing people have this view that Marx thought that religion is the opium of the masses, and therefore it has to be condemned. But they forget the other dimension. Marx also said religion is a sigh of the oppressed. And even the word opium, Marx used in a double sense, because opium in Germany was used not only as an addiction, which is a negative thing, but also as reducing pain, as a medicine. So Marx was using opium in a double sense. But even more than that, what he said is a sigh of the oppressed. So now there is a lot of very interesting work which is coming on, which is trying to liberate Marxism from this anti-religion thing, which was practiced massively in Soviet Union, especially under Stalin.
So this you said that in the deep state, Hindu community is entrenched in itself. But do you think that it is the result of a plan by the high caste through the RSS to penetrate them? For example, many communities have schemes to get members of they train them to pass this exam, this central recruitment, what is it called? IAS exams. What is it called? Civil service exams.
Yeah.
So do you think that the RSS, because already the high caste people already have a comparative advantage?
Yes.
It's this they were also promoting to make sure. For example, now I feel a majority of the judges are either RSS or sometime part of that RSS in the student days or.
Yeah, that's interesting point. I'm sure that that has a role to play. That upper caste people are already privileged. They are more literate. They have a long history of being upper sections of the society. During the Mughal rule and during the British rule, and they have been a part of the administrative system even during the Mughal rule and during the British rule as well. So there is a long history, and this gets passed on from generation to generation. Like education in America, allows the upper classes to reproduce themselves from one generation to another generation. So upper castes have been reproducing their privilege in India, and maybe to a lesser extent even in other South Asian countries, because caste does operate in other South Asian countries in a different form, not the same way as in India. So it is possible, and you are also right that upper caste groups might have their training and educational facilities which enable them to participate in those competitive exams. But I would say that it's not simply RSS, that this dominance of the upper caste was also there during the Congress rule. Congress ruled right after 1947 till the 1990s when the first coalition government came. And of course, Janata government came for a very brief period in 1977, but it fell down and Mrs. Gandhi came back. So during that period also, there was a dominance. Though, of course, we need more data on that, to establish that the dominance of the upper caste has been continuing throughout after the post-independence period. It's not something new when the BJP has come to power. BJP might have reinforced it, might have further strengthened it, but it already existed. So it has a longer historical pedigree than merely in the recent period.
Could I ask a question
Sure.
about your theoretical framework? You focused upon institutional racism.
Yes.
I rightly so too. I'm just wondering if there's also some mileage in also exploring what might be called Hindu privileges. So in the anti-racist arena, we have this strong literature on white privilege.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there could be an equally potent analysis of Hindu privilege as kind of comparison. Do you think there's an emergence of that kind of approach? I mean, just adding to your initial analysis, looking at, because obviously institutional racism, structural racism looks at structure, and you mentioned Bourdieu in your theoretical analysis, looking at the interplay of structure and agency.
Yes.
And the concept of white privilege, I think it's a very powerful tool to deconstruct racism inside the UK, for example, and of course in America. I'm just wondering if there's some sort of complementary work to be done on looking at Hindu privilege in the same kind of framework.
Very good. That's an excellent point, and could extend this work further to write on Hindu privilege. I mean, obviously references have been given in the article that how the privileging of Hindu takes place by virtue of their being majority, but it can go beyond that, how the privileging of the Hindu has taken place. Because one privilege of Hindu is that being a Hindu automatically means that you are a nationalist. Okay, the nationalism of commitment to India's nationalism is never questioned if you are a Hindu. whatever you might say, you already assumed that, you do not want to dismember India. You do not want to weaken the unity and integrity of India. So that's a Hindu privilege. And while all minorities are suspect in varying degrees, Muslims are suspect the most, Sikhs probably second, and then the Christians, but there is this privileging that the Hindu identifies with a nation, and therefore you have automatic view about the Hindu, that Hindu is patriotic, and your suggestion is very good, because this came up when some people started using the word Hindu terrorism, that there are Hindu terrorists, and some of the people said that that is not possible. Hindus can't be terrorists, that the word terrorism cannot be applied for Hindus. And there was one woman who went to the High Court, Punjab and Haryana High Court, saying that this should not be allowed, because Hindu by nature cannot be terrorist, because she was trying to equate terrorism with breaking the country, weakening the country, and therefore Hindu cannot be, but other people have shown that Hindu terrorist groups have indulged in terroristic activities, and some very interesting work is being done. So that's a very valuable suggestion, and I'm glad that it's being recorded so that I won't forget later on. And thank you for that.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
So the other concept that we normally talk about is intersectionality.
Intersectionality, yeah.
And so how would that play out in your theoretical framework in terms of caste and gender and class? And so within the Hindu frameworks, if you're talking about Hindu privilege and dominance,
yes.
How would that play out in terms of all the divisions between Hindus?
That's again very useful thing, and I think maybe when I write a book, that could be a chapter on that, and I will seek your help on that. That intersectionality would be very useful, because in Hindu dominance, what is taking place is an intersection between religion, that's the Hindu religion, caste, that is upper caste, and also gender. That Hindu domination is mainly male domination.
And class.
And class as well, yes, and class as well. The upper castes are generally more privileged in terms of their economic location. And this is also to do with history, because majority of the religious minorities in India have come through conversion. And conversion always took place from castes which were considered lower. First, the Muslims, the number of Muslims who got converted to Islam, they were lower caste. Similarly, Sikh religion, the first conversions were upper caste, the Khatri caste, which is the next to the Brahmin caste. But subsequently, it is the artisans and the peasants who en masse converted to Sikhism in the Punjab. So therefore, the privileged castes, which were also economically dominant, they did not convert to these minority religions. So the very structure of conversion, in Christianity, it may be different. That I think Christianity is much older in India, and probably going to 4th, especially in Kerala, going back to 4th and 5th century maybe. And I remember a conversation with one family in Kerala. She was the mother of a friend of mine, and I was just sharing that in Punjab, the people who became Christians were low caste people. And is there a similar kind of a practice in Kerala? And she said, no, we are Brahmin Christians. And I laughed a bit, but then I didn't want to embarrass her. And that, Christianity obviously doesn't have any concept. But what she was saying was that, we are Christians not because the British rule was giving us some economic crumbs as they were giving to untouchables in Punjab and other parts. And that's why they converted to Christianity. We have been Christians from the 5th century and so on and so forth. But certainly among the Muslims and the Sikhs and Christians in Punjab, the Christians in Punjab are the lowest caste in Punjab, both in Punjab and Pakistan. Pakistan's about 2% population is Christians, and almost all of them are converts from the lowest caste of the Hindus who became Christians. Some of them became Christians at the time of partition, because if they were Sikhs or Hindus, they might be slaughtered. But they said, we are Christians, and they were kept. They were not attacked. And so there is a class dimension. So intersectionality would work in religion, in caste, in gender, and class. That's a wonderful suggestion again. And thank you very much for that.
I think from my point of view, the most impressive aspect of your essay was this business about differentiating between institutional racism and the racism of different communities. And also the other aspect was actually how the word communal is understood in the West and in our countries. And in fact, I think we can extrapolate that into the situation in Palestine. For example, we start calling the Palestinians racist because they don't like Zionism or whatever. The battle, there are two equal sides, and they're both bad as each other. And really, we must condemn the most reactionary form of racism. So don't condemn what's happening to the Palestinians. We condemn what the Palestinians think about their oppressors. So I think that gives us a framework in which we can actually fight racism, which is what we needed in Britain when we came up with the concept of institutional racism, because that allowed us to say, well, it's not the National Front that we need to defeat.
Yes,
it's actually the police, the judiciary, political parties. They are entrenched in racism. Right? And what they want to do is to actually pose the white community against the immigrant community or the migrant communities, and say, well, they're both on a similar level. And we have seen this happening even recently when they're saying, the white working class are really the worst in terms of what they're suffering at the moment. So I think that's a very good concept, and we need to actually do some comparisons on different racism in different contexts and see how that institutional racism. But can I ask you a question? Is this concept of the institutional racism been adopted as a method of fighting racism in India?
Institutional racism is not used in India. I mean, people do refer to it when they think about Western societies, those who are familiar with this discourse. But obviously, racism is not recognized in India. And it's interesting what you said, that there is an element of racism even in dealing with the untouchables. And there's also a kind of racism in dealing with people from South India and Northeast India. That people from South India are generally darker in complexion compared with people from the North. And there is a kind of hidden racism that in North India, it's people who are lower caste, agricultural laborers who are darker in complexion because they have to work in the fields, and also maybe because of the history of casteism. So there is kind of hidden racism there, and certainly against the people from the Northeast, people from Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, and so on and so forth. Many times, students from those places in Delhi have been attacked on racist ground that you look like Chinese. You are not true Indians. So there is a kind of racism in Indian society which is actually not recognized. Communalism is recognized, casteism is recognized, but a kind of racism is not recognized. But I'm also very glad about the first point which you raised, that how the idea of institutional communalism, which has inspiration in institutional racism, can further feed back into the discourse on institutional racism, and especially how it can be used in looking at the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, when some people say that we are equidistant between Palestinian activists and the Zionist activists. You're not equidistant. When Palestinians are weak and Zionists are the aggressors, and you say that we consider them equal, the aggressor and the victim, then you are actually siding with the aggressor. Unless you actually hit at the aggressor, you are not being equal. Equality can only be if you weaken the dominant power of those who are aggressors. So yeah, that's a very good suggestion and valuable. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, go on. You go. You go.
You want to come in, Surinder?
No, you go.
Yeah, I thought your article was really good, very clearly written, and in a way, because quite a lot of us have been involved in anti-racist struggles here, and particularly Stephen Lawrence campaign has made big changes, but
absolutely,
there were similar sort of things going on since 70s. So that was quite a good comparison. It's a good way of understanding what's happening in India. But I think there are differences, and I think Surinder's brought some, the intersectionality. But I think caste and casteism, it sort of overarches regardless of which religion it is. So which is what you're talking about. So it's another way of organizing. Of fighting, if we could actually develop that or link with that, I would say that will cover different religious things. Specifically, I liked your definition of a word, because words are very powerful and they do change, and their usage does change, which you showed in relation to communalism. But that happens here about suddenly the multiculturalism's become a bad word now. But when it started in this country, it was with the idea of actually trying to highlight the differences and use the positive bit of it. But now it's all being used by both sides, So words have to be constantly analyzed and seized. And in relation to that, so the meanings. So I thought that communalism is good, but I don't know how that could be brought in the context of Indian politics, because they use the word communism all the time.
Yes.
So it would be quite difficult.
Yes.
In relation to that, also, you talked about the loyalties question. So Hindus are automatically assumed to be nationalists or loyal to the concept of India. I think that's true. It's like the cricket test that was used here. In the cricket match, if you supported either India or Pakistan, you're not England, then you're not really British, regardless of, it's that sort of concept. Very simplistic. I thought that could be developed a bit more, because in some ways part of as well as the institutional domination is that particularly Muslim community has to constantly prove, because they have an option in a way. It's seen as they have an option of going to India, going to Pakistan. Sorry, it's seen as both positively and negatively, and so it's positively used. But what do you think of India as opposed to what do you think of Pakistan? So I think that needs to be developed a bit more. I'll come back to the equal opportunities, and you mentioned in your introduction as well that we need to develop that. But I would have thought there is quite a lot of bureaucratic information or information available about that because of the positive discrimination or reserved places. So there's enough information available already about who's in position of what authority or whatever jobs or etc. I think there is enough information available.
Yeah, there are several points, and all of them are very good. Let me start from the last one, that information is already available. If you're referring to India because of the reservation,
India, yes.
Yeah, that if there is a legislation which allows reservation in jobs and education institutions for what are called scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, But the point is that that information is available only for the caste. The information on religion is very rarely collected. The information on ethnicity, whether one is a Gujarati, is very rarely collected, and it's not a part of the standard practice to collect that information.
No, it's part of the various forms for the education things. Part of it is religion, because that's how the legal sort of things are also administered, I think.
No, I mean, you will not collect any information on in a university how many professors are Hindu, how many are Muslims, and that's not a part of the legal apparatus, because here the university has to, I mean, I'm taking the example of university, but it will be applicable to any other institution, that when a job is advertised, the institution is under obligation to say how many people applied, what were their ethnicity, how many people were shortlisted, those who were shortlisted, what was their ethnicity, and those who were finally interviewed, who was selected. Okay. Now, this information is not collected even in India on the question of caste. This information is not collected. What is merely collected in India is that if 100 students have been admitted, are there 20 students who are from scheduled caste background and 5 from the scheduled tribe background, and there are about 25% reservation, and in some cases backward class reservation. That is all what is collected. It's not systematically monitored, but certainly not on religion, certainly not on any other dimension. So there is a serious lacuna on that basis, and that's actually what I was hinting, that if institutional communalism has to be questioned, then it should be pointed out that when the applications are sought for a job, how many people applied from a Hindu upper caste, how many people from Muslims, and how many were shortlisted, how many were interviewed, and who got selected. If that information is available, we will know the exact scale of the dominance and the privileging of the Hindu. That's one point I wanted to make, but thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain this. The other point, I've kind of forgotten about them very systematically, but if I remember it, that you mentioned about the intersectionality, which Surinder had mentioned. Yeah, certainly that is true. And can you briefly recoup your other points?
I was suggesting sort of fight against casteism, or caste, how the elite would be a way of overarching over the religious differences, because as you mentioned, there is the caste things with all the religion, where there's open or a bit more hidden, and in a way that links in with the class oppression as well. So
yes, I think the caste question does demand more work. My wife, Professor Meena Danda, she teaches. She's a professor of philosophy and cultural politics. She teaches at Wolverhampton. She's engaged in this caste question very extensively, and I think it is true that on the question of caste, one needs to go beyond the Hindu community, because in the non-Hindu religious communities in India, caste may not be recognized theologically. For example, among the Sikhs and the Muslims and the Christians, caste does not recognize, and the theory does not recognize, but caste is practiced among all the 3 communities in different forms. And in the Sikhs, even constitutional guarantee is also given for Dalit Sikhs, though those constitutional guarantees are not given for Muslim Dalits and the Christian Dalits, and some of them are trying to fight. So the question of caste would be actually even, in one sense, going beyond intersectionality, because it goes beyond the religious divide. So it will. But there was something else you said, which apart from that, somewhere, which I missed.
I mentioned about the loyalty and the cricket test that Norman Tebbit used here.
Yeah,
and that's used against the Muslim people, because it's seen as if they have an alternative place to go to. Is
yes.
Considered
Yeah, that's
that
right.
way.
That's right.
The choice
I mean, I don't know whether it's an alternative place. That is the reason that they are considered whatever. It's very difficult to find an exact word. Indigenous, local. That the Hindu is located in India. Hindu will never think of dividing India, and which is not true, because when the Tamil separatism came against Hindi, Tamil Nadu had almost threatened secession from India, and the majority of the Tamilians are Hindu. So it's not necessary that if someone is a Hindu, that Hindu will not think of seceding from India. In fact, this question came up in the Assam movement also. The Assam secession was led by upper caste Hindus. Of course, the government gave concessions and brought them over, and the secessionist movement became weaker. But Bodoland, people who ask for separatism, separate Bodoland state, are upper caste Hindus, and that then. But still, this view is there that Hindu by nature is loyal to India. And you are very right that in saying that a white person is automatically considered loyal to the British nation because that person supports the cricket team, which is the British team, and the loyalty of the non-whites are suspect merely because they support the other. Yeah, that's interesting. One can extrapolate from that. Thank you. Very useful.
I mean, what we are seeing at the moment in terms of, certainly in terms of Kashmir, saying to the Muslims, go to Pakistan. In the coronavirus also saying it's the Muslims who are actually spreading it. But I mean, the thing I wanted to ask you is there any concrete examples of how this communalism manifests itself in the structural racism against Muslims?
There is a huge amount of data on that, on how the structural communalism disadvantages Muslims. There is a Satcher Committee report. If you want to have a look at that, if you just Google Satcher Committee report, it is a huge report done by a retired judge of the Delhi High Court, which looked at the disadvantages of Muslims in education, literacy, health services, and so on and so forth. And it actually brought enormous amount of data that in some cases, Muslims were even more disadvantaged than the Dalits in some cases. And that has huge amount of empirical data. You might want to have a look at that.
Yeah, definitely.
And they actually produced actual data on that. That is so there is available.
This information must be available. That's what I'm saying. I think they do collect that sort of information. This is what I was trying to say. There is enough information about that.
Well, not on a systematic basis all over India. It's on a religious basis.
It's not officially collected, but it is actually researched by others.
Yeah, right. I mean, it can be used, but there is no it's not legal requirement.
Yeah.
There is a legal requirement to have caste census, but there's on jobs and education institutions, but there's no legal requirement on religion.
I think the Saga report illustrated, for example, that reserved seats are generally allocated to constituencies which have a high Muslim population. In other words, they become disenfranchised.
Yes.
That's an example of structural racism, I suppose, institutional racism, institutional communalism.
Yes.
The idea that Muslims, and conversely, where there's small Muslim populations in constituencies, there are no reserved seats for scheduled tribes or castes. That's an interesting phenomenon which the Saga Commission exposed. And I saw a very interesting petition set up a couple of years ago by some concerned people petitioning the president to get this changed, but nothing came of it. So that's an interesting example.
So say again, what was the interesting example?
There's some evidence emerging from this commission, the Saga Commission.
Oh yeah. Which
illustrated that where for the allocation of reserved seats for the reserved tribes and castes take place in constituencies with high Muslim populations, which means they can't vote for a Muslim candidate. So this helps depress Muslim representation in parliaments and state assemblies.
Mm-hmm.
So as a consequence, Muslims are underrepresented in terms of their population size.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, such a committee did bring out that. That's right. It was quite an explosive report.
But can I just ask, picking up the issue about intersectionality?
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of data which you can interrogate around elections, in particular the 14 and 19 election.
Yeah.
And it's intriguing to discover, for example, that around 8 to 9% of Muslims voted for BJP.
Yeah.
Which suggests to me that there's an issue here about intersectionality, about class, about wealth, income, and so on and so forth. I mean, the Muslim vote is not homogenous. And you mentioned the hidden caste system in Muslim communities. And I suspect that those 9% of Muslims are the rich and powerful ones. And they identify with BJP.
I'm not sure necessarily that it's the rich and powerful, but it is true that there is a Muslim elite in India, which gets the prime posts of being appointed governors and vice chancellors and ambassadors. It's a pretty small elite, and it's partly has links with the Mughal rule, and those families are being passed down who were once a part of the governing elite. The 5 to 7% people who are believed to have voted BJP is a kind of complex problem. It's a combination of several things. One, a section of the Muslims have been co-opted by the BJP, who are in the BJP organization. They get selected from the for election to the parliament. And many of them are able to use their own family connections and community connections to vote for the BJP. So if in a certain seat Muslim is put up as a candidate by the BJP, the mere fact that the candidate is a Muslim, section of the Muslim community will vote for the BJP. So in the election statistics, it will be shown that they have voted for the BJP. But they have voted for the BJP primarily because the local candidate is a Muslim. It will be very rare that an upper caste Hindu is put up a candidate and some section of the Muslims would vote. That's one. Second is that there's an element of question also involved, hidden threats being involved. That if you do not vote for us, and there were examples in the last election, there were hidden threats. Even the name of Maneka Gandhi was mentioned, that your life will be very difficult if I don't get selected, and which was a hidden threat that if I don't get elected, then there will be reprisals. So the section of the Muslims would vote even out of fear, But of course, there will be section also who are close to the BJP elite, and so it's kind of more complex than simply that it'll be the rich and the powerful Muslims who would be among those 5 to 7% who voted for the BJP.
Also, 5 to 7% is not a lot, and also the Muslims don't have much choice anyway.
It's actually about 9%.
Yeah, but even then, they don't still have much choice, and 93% voted against the BJP.
In some cases they don't have a choice, and because some of the candidates put forward by the Congress party are also not very attractive, and if there is that way Muslims have shown a high degree of political consciousness. If they see some candidate who's been consistently fighting against communalism, they do vote in large numbers to those candidates. And some of the candidates of the Samajwadi Party and BSP who have shown that kind of character have been massively voted by the Muslims. But merely by merely being a candidate of a non-BJP party does not, in the eyes of the Muslims, entitle you to say that you are fighting against communalism. Because many of those, whether in the Congress or Samajwadi Party or BSP, also collude. I think the left parties are probably the only ones where this charge cannot be made, despite all the criticism one might have of the CPI, CPM. On this score, they are trustworthy, that they do not bow to before the Hindu communal bias, and they are consistently anti-communist. And I think Muslims do vote for CPM, CPI candidates where they think they could be winning candidates. In the last elections in Kerala, it was very interesting that many of the voters who had voted for the CPM, CPI, they voted for the Congress rather, because they thought that CPM, CPI are not in a position to defeat the BJP, and the Muslim voters wanted BJP defeated. So they voted for the Congress, and which is not a true reflection of the Congress party, popular party. But also on the question of the Hindu being, identified with India, there's another question which need to be raised. That the majority of, if one has to pick up a country where Hindus are preponderant majority of the population, it's not India, it's Nepal. Nepal has a much higher proportion of its population which are Hindus. And there are very strong anti-India feelings among the Nepali people. The mere fact that, India has a Hindu majority does not endear India to the Nepali people, because they think many kind of imperialistic actions and practices of the Indian establishment in Nepal. So there is an anti-India sentiment which cuts across, which goes beyond the religious allegiance.
Hi. Quick question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
I can't hear you properly.
Not hear me.
I can hear you now.
Okay. So my point, thank you for your talk, by the way. I thought it was really interesting. My point was about the usefulness of the data. So you mentioned that it would be useful for us to have a lot of data on the different sort of hiring practices in India. So here we have all the data in the world. At the end of every job application, you're asked to fill out diversity-related questions, your gender, your religion, age, and all sorts. So what I find that despite having all the data, all it really does, it proves to us scientifically that we have a problem. Everyone is aware that, the hiring practices are not all that fair, but it doesn't go as far as solving the root of the problem, which is unconscious bias, right? And that is a change in mentality. Maybe a data might increase awareness of the problem, but how do we go about solving the fundamental problem, which is the biases that we see that institutionally?
Very right. Very, very brilliant question. And the question of unconscious bias is obviously the deeper. Real racism is that. Similarly, real communalism is that. That you don't want to harm the other person. You do not commit any violence against the other person, but you still think the other person to be inferior. Is the concept of spirit. This is what happens in the caste system. Caste system is in India. The Brahman, the poorest Brahman, thinks himself or herself to be superior even than the richest Dalit. And the Dalit might be hugely richer than the Brahman, but a poor Brahman will still think that I'm a superior. Similarly, racism is that a white person thinking that he or she is superior by virtue of being white. The argument in favor of legal structures is that changing the unconscious bias is a very difficult process. And it's a long drawn out process through education, through awareness, and it's not that it can't be fought. That obviously there are people among the white community who do fight against racism, who spend their entire lives. I have many friends who are such wonderful creatures that they have fought against racism throughout their life, and more than many of the members of the ethnic minorities. They have understood that, and so they've been able to overcome that unconscious bias. So it is true that, so one argument in favor of having legal measures is that that's a long-term thing, and one doesn't know when that'll materialize. But in the short run, the medium run, we must have some legal institutional measures to weaken this, not to eradicate this, but to weaken this, and that's one argument. The other is that belief that law has also potentiality of changing behavior and attitudes eventually. Okay, that if something is considered illegal, people might start thinking that if their attitude and behavior does not fit with that legality, something is immoral about that. Okay, so by making casteism illegal or making white racism illegal, you might eventually succeed in making people think that it is immoral to be racist. It's immoral to be a casteist, and that is what is likely to change into a change in unconscious bias. But certainly, it is true that unconscious bias is a difficult thing to find. But that should not lead us to believe that there cannot be short-term or medium-term measures which can weaken this. This was the argument which Ambedkar took in India. Ambedkar knew that caste prejudices are very deep-rooted. They are part of the Hindu psyche, that upper caste Hindus do think them to be superior. The Varna system is based on that. But he wanted to institute these measures so that this caste oppression can be weakened. And it is an interim measure. It's not a permanent thing. And to the extent that it leads to some upward mobility, that some Dalits have become judges, they have become police officers, they have become civil servants, they have become professors and journalists, that strengthens the bargaining power of the Dalits. Similarly, I would say that the anti-racist legislation, if to some extent it has allowed ethnic minorities to make a space in the judiciary, in the armed forces, in the academia, and it, 50 years back, it will be probably very rare to find a judge who is from an ethnic minority, but you do find right now, it will be very difficult to find so many professors who are from ethnic minorities and so on and so forth, but you do find them now. That strengthens the manpower or human resource of those communities, which can actually increase their bargaining power. So it's not a permanent solution, but it is a move in that direction.
As an anecdote there, when I began in social work in early 70s, things were pretty bad, as I'm sure Surinder will confirm. And on my first day at work, a social worker burst into the office saying, "Can anyone speak Asian?"
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And since those early days, I think social work in particular has got a proud record of challenging unconscious bias. Yes. It's not been perfect, but there's been amazing work done by social work departments and social work tutors and people like Surinder, yes, who I've worked with in the past, yes, making sure that we recruited non-white students of social work to work with non-white communities and so on and so forth. And it's been a struggle, but I think there's been an enormous difference in the past 20 years on social work. It's not true of other professions. It's not true, say, of nursing, for example. But Dr. Brooks is a good example. The department there has done tremendous work in anti-racist practices. It's far from perfect, but the point is, it's a slow process and things can change. I don't know if Surinder's got a view about that in social work. Have I got it correct, Surinder?
Yes, I think that, we've changed the cohorts from a very dominant white students to now almost the whites are in minority in some places. Yeah. But in terms of equal opportunities, I've always thought that there's one thing that people don't take up is that equal opportunities, of course, doesn't engage with class. There is no there's no power that you can take a case against the fact that you haven't been employed because of your class background. So I think that's, if you're going to promote that sort of equal opportunity legislation, I think class needs to be a fundamental thing that needs to be involved in that. Yeah. And also, I think one of the other questions, I don't know how that would translate in terms of India, is that I found that here, when people, Indians here will we fight for equal opportunities. We, you know, are against institutional racism and stuff. And yet there are people who are in very top sort of hierarchical positions, you know, Jats and higher caste people, still maintain those hierarchies in their other lives, but when it comes to promoting themselves in terms of anti-racist legislation, they're willing to do so. So I'm not sure to what extent it changes occupational structures and economic conditions for many people, but there is that snag that always have. So I don't know how that translates in terms of the India.
Well, I think your question is a very good one, especially from another debate which has been taking place in this country, which my wife is involved with, is to bring caste into as a discriminatory legal practice, that along with race, gender, and disability, caste should also be legally recognized as a source of discrimination, and it should be made illegal. And very interestingly, the Hindus are up against this. They do not want this caste to be recognized. Their argument is that if caste is recognized, Hindu religion will become stigmatized. And in the beginning, some of the Sikhs also argued this, that, oh, Sikhism doesn't believe in caste. But when it was pointed out that they don't believe in caste, but caste does prevail in Sikh society, and may not be in the same rulent form as in the Hindu society, but does prevail in Sikh society, some of them have changed the position, and they are willing to support that legislation. It's true that on the question of abolishing racism, Hindu Sikh communities might totally join that, but they do not look inside and fight against casteism in the same way. Therefore, this will be a central task for people who believe in equality, that caste should also be recognized eventually. And the present government is obviously ambiguous and trying to smuggle its way out of this situation, because there is a pressure from the Indian government also. Indian government also does not want caste to be recognized, because then it will become very well known. And people in America, in Canada, in Australia, they're looking at this, that if Britain makes caste discrimination illegal, then we will be able to fight similarly in America and those countries. So it is true that the fight for including caste also as a source of discrimination and making it illegal is a very important one among the Indian communities.
I was thinking that in terms of what's all been said before, legislation and data gets us so far, but it doesn't actually always change people's inner selves, and there are limitations. It might be a starting point, but if you look at Britain in terms of institutional racism, and then you get certain crises or things happening like the 9/11 referendum campaign, and it's as if all those attitudes which had become not quite right to express in public were bubbling underneath. Then they burst out again, as if they've been given free rein to express them. So it's it's just a sort of thing that's a very long, we have to do everything we can, but it's a very long process. And how do you actually start changing the culture and the people's way of looking at things beyond the legislation and the data?
Sure. Same question which you asked, but that the cultural attitudes and that more difficult to do. But I have a feeling that this is also a generational question. Mm-hmm. That's what my daughter says. And when I used to talk to her about this question of race, she would say that she was in school, that it does not practice. We don't see this in school. Mm. That we mix around, Hindu, Sikhs, Black. Our friendships are not based on that. Our socialization is not based on that. Our love affairs are not based on that. We are relatively free. She's slightly changing in the mind, and she's recognizing race discrimination. But I think that the younger generation are relatively free compared with the older generations. And that probably is some indication of some cultural change which is taking place. And I think that that was also reflected in political dynamics, that it is the younger people who were active supporters of Jeremy Corbyn and Labour Party under him, because I think they are more used to this discourse of equality than the older generation. And also that among the, in terms of age groups, it is the older generation which votes tremendously for the Conservative Party. And so there is probably, it might be a slow process, but some change is taking place. And I think legislation cannot be the only reason behind that change, but legislation would have played a certain role. I certainly believe that legislation is not the only solution. It is eventually changing, making this, coming to this belief that all human beings are equal in respect to gender, caste, race, color, or even disability. It's a long jump, and that is what we dream for. And Sundar, to come back to your point about this class thing, it is true that equal legislation kind of sidesteps this, and because if you recognize class, then you're basically questioning capitalism, and you're going beyond equal legislation. To some extent, capitalism is willing to live, is capable of living with all human beings being considered equal irrespective of your color, gender, race, if they fit into the capitalist economy. But if you start bringing the question of class, then you are questioning the very foundations of capitalism. So that is only possible through a socialist outlook, not an equal opportunity legislation. Equal opportunity legislation is a liberal, egalitarian perspective, but it's obviously not questioning the fundamental class inequalities which are inherent in a capitalist economy. But I think that equal opportunity legislation can help in that socialist vision. It does not hinder that, isn't it?
But if we're going to promote it, then we should actually acknowledge that hasn't, that there's a gap there, but also that it should be included, isn't it?
Well, yes, we should. Wherever we can put our pressure or contribute to the role, we should bring out class dimension. Certainly.
Can I come back to your original point about your previous point about caste and caste and age?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's a regional thing, or maybe things have moved on. But my experience here of some of the children in some of the further education colleges has been that young people actually coalesced much more around caste than we did in our generation. And certainly in Birmingham, there a few years ago, there were gangs that emerged on caste basis as well. And certainly in groups, interactions between young people in colleges and stuff, there were, my daughter used to tell me that people used to sit in the canteens according to their caste groups and things. So I'm not sure, maybe that's changed now or whatever, but we were surprised here that young people had taken on so much to caste relationship.
No, I completely agree with you. My wife, Meena Danda, she actually works, and she has also observations on this, on caste prevailing in schools. And that was one of the reasons for arguing that caste discrimination should be made illegal. Because in fact, there were examples of Dalit children being mocked at and even harmed in many ways. But what was interesting was that many Dalit children did not know about their caste till they went to school. It's only at school they were asked that, oh, you are a Chamar or whatever, and we are Jats and Brahmins or Khatris or whatever. And they came and asked their parents that what is our caste? They did not know, because the parents didn't want those children to say that we belong to any, why should they educate their children to believe that you are a lower caste? They would raise them as equal. But then they experience this in school. It is a complex question why this has happened. I don't know whether it's happening more, that I don't know. And compared with what was happening in the 1950s or 60s, But certainly it is true that it has not gone away among the younger generations. But also among the younger generations, I think there are countercurrents also. That is not the dominant trend, that younger generation of ethnic minorities are more caste conscious. Similarly, among the younger generation, there are more left-wing oriented, socialist oriented younger people who fight against caste discrimination. So, but it does exist. That is true. It hasn't gone away. But when I was saying about younger generation, I was probably thinking about the younger generation of white people, that some of them probably have overcome this racist consciousness, if not completely, significantly. And when I was referring to supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, I had them in mind, that they have gone through this change probably, and compared with their grandparents or even parents, they are much more freer on that score. And of course, some people talk about marriages, that marriage is one institution through which it happens, that when there are interracial marriages, intercaste marriages, that breaks many barriers, many prejudices, because the lived experience is different from what you believed. And Ambedkar believed in this. Ambedkar believed that one way of fighting casteism in India would be greater encouragement to intercaste marriages. But obviously, the intercaste marriage is still a very minority phenomenon in India.
Hi, Doctor. I actually found your point about colorism really interesting, and I was just thinking about that. So with respect to, especially because there are parallels in the African community about how light-skinned people are given more privilege over the darker-skinned. So basically, with respect to colorism, how exactly did the colonial rule exacerbate institutional racism through the caste system in India?
True. It is certainly true that colonialism would have reinforced the idea of superiority of the white color, because they were the officers and they were the elite, and the masses looked up to them. That if this is something, if you're a ruler, if you are the superior officer, or even a judge, or a police officer, they are the ones, and that would. But I think that the superiority of the white race goes beyond colonial period.
Okay.
That there are examples of racism taking place in India even in the pre-colonial period.
All right. Okay. Do you mind elaborating a bit more on that?
Yes. And there are also many songs, folk songs, which are pre-colonial times, which extol the virtues of white race. This might have something to do with Aryan and Dravidian struggles, and which also goes along with the caste dimension. I'm not sure that whether it's scientifically established. One view is that Aryans came to India and they pushed the dark-colored people into the south, and that's why southern people are more in dark complexion. Or those who stayed within North India, they subjugated them to lower caste. So the so-called lower caste, one shouldn't say lower caste, so-called lower caste, like the Madhya Sikhs and the Balmikis in northern India, they are of a darker complexion. And the upper caste, especially the Brahmins and the Khatris, they are of a slightly dark, B complexion so this prejudice existed before, but I'm sure that the British colonial rule would have reinforced and strengthened this. Certainly, there is no rule. There is one woman anthropologist who did a very interesting study on the army recruitment in the colonial army.
Okay.
And she argued that when the recruitment was going on in the British Army, some of the English officers thought that the Sikhs are a bit like them. The Sikhs are tall and well-built, and they're white complexion, and they're almost like this. So she said that one of the reasons Sikhs were favored in recruitment to the army was this racial dimension. But obviously that doesn't explain the whole of it. There was other questions about You know, they were from the peasantry, and the British rulers wanted peasantry to be won over. Muslims were also recruited in large number into the British colonial army, but they were this on, and she actually proves this. She actually gives examples of British army officers giving these statements that Sikhs have a similarly kind of sharp nose and they look like us, and so there was a kind of racial affinity with them, and that is one explanation of they being offered. So there was certainly colonial rule reinforced this. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I think there was also the concept of the martial race that the British introduced after the 1857, because one of the problems they found with the 1857 struggle was that the Indian soldiers got united. So what they wanted to do was to recruit from Punjab, control Bengal, and from other parts. So they created this whole concept. They say to the Sikhs, you are a martial race. They also said it to the Muslims in Punjab that you are a martial race.
Yes.
So I mean, a part of it was, you know, playing politics rather than.
Yeah, and also they included the Rajput and the Gurkhas also. In the martial race. Yeah.
Also, I mean, the British had talking earlier on about the Babu system in Bengal that used all the basically precursor of the civil service, and that obviously people who were already educated within the British style education system were the ones who were favored, who then became whole class of had a whole class of people with authority, and so that sort of continues the favoring of higher caste and educated. So it sort of perpetuates that.
But that was also to confront the Indian nationalism, because what they were saying is the Bengalis were in the lead in the 1857 struggle. They were also recruited as soldiers.
Yeah.
And that's why they didn't want to recruit them as soldiers. They said the Bengalis are too clever. They are intellectual, right. And therefore they cannot join the army anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's why I think the Indian thing it is a lot more complex. I mean, earlier on you sort of posed the sort of thing in Nepal and Assam and people being Hindu but still anti. Because I don't think that's religious question, you see. I think it's more national question. The Nepalese, Assamese, Marathis, Tamil, if they want the free national development of their own nation, then religion will come as a secondary thing, because they want to develop their own territory as a nation. So,
which obviously the Hindu nationalists want to oppose that.
The Hindu nationalists overall want to oppose that, yes. So there's always going to be that conflict between between the two.
That's why I think that regional nationalism can be a powerful progressive force, because if regional national sentiments emerge, that break the homogeneity of the Hindu nationalism. That if people see themselves more as Tamil nationalists, Bengali nationalists, then where does Hindu nationalism come in? So they are very afraid of that, and that's why they want to discourage regional parties.
In your article, I wanted to ask about you mentioned about the judiciary, and you mentioned about the terrorism.
Yeah.
I wondered whether the terrorism is linking with perhaps what Surinder's speciality about so suddenly the whole world, like now we started talking about coronavirus, whole world after 9/11 started talking about terrorism, and I just wondered whether it got sort of linked in with the Kashmir issue and terrorism in that context.
Well, terrorism had a longer, of course, the term terrorism was developed in the context of Palestinian and Palestinian struggle. And Edward Said and others have pointed out that the genuine national struggle of Palestinian people was condemned in verbal terms by coining this word of terrorism. then it became an abusive term to use against people who were fighting for their legitimate rights, and it was used in other places. But before actually Kashmiri terrorism came into discourse, it was Sikh terrorism which was highlighted in the Punjab as the main threat, because in terms of chronology that came earlier, that it started emerging in the late 70s and especially in the 1980s after 1984. And the Kashmiri terrorism started being used for Kashmiri people after about 1989, late 1980s. So it has kind of that pedigree. But it has become dominant now, being associated with the Muslims.
Yeah.
And whether it's the Kashmiri Muslims, but of course they can't run away from this. That there are Manipuri, there is terrorism in Manipur, which is predominantly Hindu majority. There are also Nagas who are terrorists, who are Christians. So they can't really say that's only confined to them. And Sikh terrorist groups also once in a while again emerge, though it has been crushed very badly. So it's not possible to just kind of link terrorism with the Muslim community, but that is the attempt of the kind of Hindu discourse, Hindu communal discourse. Can't hear you, Sebastian.
Shall we wind up?
Yeah, I think it's time to wind up. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for
Thank you very much.
discussion.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the discussion. It was